The night wind cut like knives across the plains, and when the warrior man pushed open the cabin door, he found a pale woman trembling on the dirt floor, her lips blue, her hands clutching her torn dress as though it could still hold warmth. Her name was Pirianka, and she was 30, though in that hour of suffering she looked both much younger and impossibly older. Snow had drifted across the thresholds of the abandoned settlement, burying the road behind her. The wooden shingles rattled above her head, and every gust forced smoke down the broken chimney like a spirit that had lost its way. Pirianka had not eaten in 2 days. Her horse had collapsed a mile back, and she'd walked on numb feet until she stumbled into the forgotten cabin. Now she sat curled like a child in a corner, shivering so violently that her teeth made a sound louder than the storm outside. She thought she might simply fall asleep and let the cold take her. And then the door creaked open. He entered without a word. A tall man, broad-shouldered, his chest bare despite the biting cold. Long black hair, damp with snow, fell down past his shoulders, and tribal jewelry, bone, turquoise, and iron hung against the warm brown of his skin. His presence filled the small space the way fire fills darkness. Pirianka stared up at him, wide-eyed, unsure if he was a vision brought by her frozen mind. But the heat of his breath proved he was real. The warrior man bent to her level, his sharp features softened by the way he looked at her, not with suspicion, nor desire, but with the quiet gravity of someone who had seen suffering before. Around his shoulders he pulled a heavy wool blanket, dark and woven with tribal patterns that spoke of his people's long memory. Without hesitation, he draped it over her. The moment it touched her skin, Pirianka gasped. The warmth was almost painful at first, like hot coals against frozen flesh. She clutched the edges of the blanket desperately, pressing it against her body, her eyes filling with tears. "You will live," he said quietly, his voice deep, accented, but steady. For Pirianka, it felt like being pulled back from death itself. For him, it was only an act of mercy, a gift given to a stranger in need. But mercy has different meanings on the plains. They sat in silence for a long while, the cabin creaking with each gust. The warrior man knelt by the empty hearth, striking sparks until a small fire licked at the wood he'd carried inside. The glow spread across the room, painting his features in flickering gold. Pirianka watched him work, grateful yet unsettled. She wondered who he was, why he had helped her, and what debt she might now owe. Her lips cracked as she whispered, "Why? Help me?" The warrior man glanced at her only once before turning back to the fire. "Because the earth gave you to me tonight. To leave you would be wrong." She did not understand what he meant, but her body was too weak to argue. The warmth of the blanket and fire seeped into her bones, and her eyes grew heavy. She fell asleep against the wall, the blanket pulled tight around her, never noticing the way he kept watch, his hand resting on the hilt of the knife at his belt. By morning, the snowstorm had passed. Sunlight slanted through the gaps in the cabin's roof, and the world outside lay buried under a white silence. Pirianka woke with her body stiff but alive, her fingers tangled in the fabric of the blanket. She turned, ready to thank him, but he was already gone. Only his footprints remained in the snow beyond the door, broad, purposeful, leading back toward the open plains. Pirianka clutched the blanket tighter around her shoulders, pressing her face against its coarse weave. She thought of the man's eyes, the strength in his hands, the strange words he had spoken. It wasn't until she returned to her own people later that day, stumbling back into the camp with the blanket still wrapped around her, that she understood the weight of what had happened. Gasps rose among the women. The elders stepped forward. Men exchanged glances, their jaws tightening, as though something sacred had been broken or fulfilled. One of the elders, a gray-haired woman with a face like dried earth, pointed to the blanket, and said in a voice that carried across the camp, "He has given you the blanket, Pirianka. You are his wife now." Pirianka froze. The words hit her harder than the storm. She wanted to protest, to insist it had been only kindness, only survival. But the weight of their stares told her otherwise. On these plains, a blanket was not simply cloth. It was a vow, a bond, a promise. And somehow, without knowing, without choosing, Pirianka had crossed into a life she had never imagined. The campfires of her people burned low when Pirianka stumbled back through the snow, the warrior man's blanket clutched tightly around her shoulders. Every step felt strange, as though she had returned from a world between life and death. Children, playing near the edge of the lodges, stopped in their tracks when they saw her, their dark eyes widening at the sight of the woven fabric she carried. She thought they were only surprised she was alive. But when their mothers rushed forward, pulling the children back, Pirianka felt a coldness spread through her chest. Their gazes were not on her face. They were fixed on the blanket dot. By the time she reached the central lodge, the elders were waiting. Old women with weathered skin, men with lined foreheads and sharp eyes, warriors standing like stone pillars on either side. Her cousin, Nayeli, hurried to her side, trying to steady her steps. But even Nayeli's hand trembled as she touched the edge of the blanket. "Pirianka," she whispered, voice half fear, half awe. "Do you understand what you wear?" Confused, exhausted, Pirianka shook her head. "It is only a blanket. He gave it so I would not die." Gasps rippled through the crowd. One of the elders stepped forward, her gray braids swinging over her shoulders. She was called Grandmother Sani, keeper of the stories, and her voice carried the weight of generations. "No man of his people gives a blanket without meaning," she said firmly. "To place it upon your shoulders is to bind himself to you. It is no gift of passing mercy. It is a vow." Pirianka felt her knees weaken. A vow. The crowd murmured around her, and several of the younger women exchanged knowing glances, half smiles mixed with envy. One whispered, "The spirits themselves sent him to her." Another muttered, "She is chosen." But Pirianka's heart pounded with something far from joy. She remembered his face, the quiet way he had spoken, "You will live." He had meant only to save her, hadn't he? Grandmother Sani raised her hand, silencing the whispers. Her eyes locked onto Pirianka's, as if to anchor her in a truth that could not be denied. He has given you his strength, his warmth, his promise. By the old ways, by the meaning of the blanket, you are his wife now. The word struck Pirianka harder than the storm she had endured. Wife. The title echoed in her skull. She shook her head violently, clutching the fabric tighter, as though to shield herself from the very declaration. "No," she said, her voice breaking. "I did not choose this. I do not even know his name." But the elders remained unmoved. To them, tradition was not a matter of choice, it was truth. They believed the spirits had arranged this, that her life had been saved for a reason, and that reason was binding. Nayeli squeezed her hand, whispering urgently, "Do not fight them here. Come, rest. We will think of what must be done." Reluctantly, Pirianka allowed herself to be guided away, though the eyes of the tribe followed her every step. She could feel the weight of their stares like stones on her back. Some eyes glowed with pride, others with envy, a few with suspicion. Inside her family's lodge, Pirianka finally collapsed onto the furs by the fire. The blanket was still wrapped around her, its coarse threads heavy against her skin. She wanted to tear it off, throw it away, run until the snow swallowed her. But every time she thought of removing it, the memory of his hands, strong and steady as he placed it on her shoulders, stopped her. Who was he? What did he believe she now meant to him? Would he come to claim her? The night passed in restless half-sleep. Pirianka dreamed of the cabin, of the firelight flickering against his bronze skin, of eyes that looked at her not with ownership, but with something far more unsettling. Recognition. By morning, the camp buzzed with whispers. The young warriors teased each other, saying one of their strongest had been bested not by battle, but by a woman in need. The older women nodded with satisfaction, claiming the spirits had chosen well, and Pirianka, still wrapped in the blanket, sat with her head in her hands, wondering how one desperate act of kindness could have bound her to a man she barely knew. But deep inside her, beneath the fear, beneath the weight of tradition, another feeling stirred, something she had not allowed herself to feel in years, a dangerous, flickering hope, because as much as she wanted to deny it, when she closed her eyes, she could still feel the warmth of his hands, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to forget it. The morning after the declaration, Pirianka sat near the fire in her family's lodge, staring at the blanket draped over her knees as though it were a chain. The woven patterns no longer looked like mere threads of wool, they looked like bars of a prison she hadn't chosen. Nayeli crouched beside her, whispering softly, "You should eat. You will need your strength." Pirianka shook her head. Food would not settle in her stomach, not with the weight of the tribe's words pressing down on her. Wife, the word rattled inside her skull. She had lived 30 years without belonging to any man, proud of her independence, content to follow her own path. Now, overnight, her freedom seemed stolen by one act of mercy. She had thought she would never see him again, that perhaps the warrior man had disappeared into the snow, his blanket given, his duty done. But fate is rarely so simple. A cry rose from the edge of camp. Children ran first, then the young men, until soon a cluster of voices filled the air. Pirianka stiffened as Nayeli pushed back the flap of the lodge. He had returned. The warrior man strode into the camp, tall and silent, his long black hair loose, snow glinting on his shoulders. His chest was bare despite the bitter cold, muscles taut and unflinching, tribal jewelry catching the pale sunlight. He carried no weapons openly, but his presence alone was enough to part the gathering crowd. The people greeted him with reverence, bowing heads and murmurs. He was not one of Pirianka's tribe, yet he carried himself with the authority of a man who knew his place in the story of the plains. Pirianka felt her heart twist. She clutched the blanket tighter. Grandmother Sani was the first to step forward. Her voice was strong, though her frame was bent with age. "You have given her the blanket. Do you claim what you have promised?" The camp fell silent. The warrior man's eyes found Pirianka's across the distance. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. He did not smile nor falter. His gaze was steady, burning with a strange recognition that unsettled her. "Claim nothing that is not hers to give," he said at last, his voice deep, carrying easily in the still air. "But the blanket is truth. I will not take it back." The people murmured, confusion rippling through them. Some nodded at his words with respect. Others frowned, unsure what they meant. Pirianka's throat tightened. She stood, trembling, every eye on her. "You gave this to me so I would live," she said, her voice sharp with desperation, "not to bind me." The warrior's gaze did not soften. Life and bond are not separate. The earth does not save what it does not mean to keep. Her breath caught. His words struck her like the storm wind, powerful and inescapable. Yet there was no malice in his face, only certainty. The elders exchanged glances. One of the older men muttered, "It is the will of the spirits." Another said, "He has spoken with honor." But Pirianka's chest burned. Anger rose in her, hot enough to chase away the last of the cold. She threw the blanket from her shoulders, letting it fall into the snow at her feet. Gasps erupted around the circle. "I will not be owned by a tradition I never chose," she cried. Her voice carried farther than she expected, sharp as an arrow. Camp erupted in whispers. Some looked at her with pity, others with disapproval. Grandmother Sannie's eyes flashed, but she said nothing. The warrior man bent, slowly, and lifted the blanket from the snow. He shook it free of frost, then folded it carefully over his arm. His expression never changed. "You may cast it away 100 times," he said calmly, his voice like low thunder, "but it will still carry my warmth. You cannot erase what has been done." Then he turned and walked toward the edge of camp, leaving silence in his wake. Pirianka stood trembling, her breath ragged, her heart torn between fury and something far more dangerous, a flicker of curiosity. Because no matter how hard she tried, she could not ignore the fire in his words, the certainty in his eyes, and the way her chest had tightened not just in anger, but in something frighteningly close to longing. That night, lying awake, Pirianka realized with dread that her fight was not only with her tribe or with him. It was with her own heart. The next morning dawned gray and brittle, the air so cold that even the smoke from the campfires rose slowly, reluctant to climb into the sky. Pirianka had barely slept. Her mind replayed the scene again and again, the circle of eyes, the weight of the blanket, the steady voice of the warrior man as if his words had been carved into stone. She could not stand the whispers any longer. Everywhere she walked in camp, people turned their heads, their conversations breaking into fragments. When she drew near, some smiled knowingly, as if her future had already been sealed. Others frowned, as though she were a child rebelling against the wisdom of her elders. Pirianka's jaw tightened. If she was to be chained to this man by nothing more than cloth and tradition, then she would confront him herself. She found him at the edge of the frozen creek, kneeling in the snow as he filled a water skin. His breath rose in white clouds. His long black hair spilled over his shoulders, strands glinting with frost, yet he seemed untouched by the cold. Shirtless still, his chest broad and marked by faint scars, he moved with a calm that infuriated her. Pirianka stopped a few paces away, her fist clenched around the blanket she had carried back to him. "You speak of vows," she said sharply, her voice cracking the silence. "You speak of promises I never agreed to. Why did you do this to me?" The warrior man lifted his head slowly. His eyes, dark and unwavering, met hers. He did not rise immediately. He corked the water skin first, tied it to his belt, then stood, his full height casting a shadow over her. "I did not do this to you," he said evenly. "I gave you life. The earth chose what followed." Pirianka's heart hammered in her chest. Anger pushed her words faster than her breath. "Life, yes, but not chains. I would rather have frozen than be bound by a custom I do not share." 4. The first time, something flickered across his face, not anger, but pain, quickly hidden. He stepped closer, and she caught the faint scent of wood smoke and leather, mingled with the sharp, clean air of the snow. "You speak as though I forced you," he said. "But I asked nothing from you. The vow is mine. The blanket is mine. The bond," he touched his chest with a fist, not her, "is mine to carry," Pirianka faltered. His words were strange, layered with meaning she did not yet understand. She shook her head, clutching the blanket tighter as though to anchor herself. "Then why do they say I am your wife?" "Because they know the old ways," he answered. "A man does not give his warmth to a woman without giving his name with it." Her breath caught. "Then tell me your name." For a long moment he studied her as though deciding if she was ready to hear it. Then he said simply, "I am a hive, son of no one, walker of the plains." The name hung in the air, weighty, foreign, sharp as flint. Pirianka whispered it under her breath, testing its shape on her tongue. A hive. The sound unsettled her. It felt too familiar, as though she had known it in dreams. She turned away quickly, afraid of what her heart might do if she lingered. "I will not wear your blanket," she said firmly, throwing it down between them in the snow. "I will not be claimed." Ahive bent once more, lifted the blanket carefully, and shook it free of frost. But instead of folding it, he placed it gently across a fallen log, letting it rest there, untouched by either of them. "I do not claim what does not wish to be claimed," he said quietly. "But the bond is not yours to break. It was not made by us. It was made by the storm, by the fire, by the breath between life and death. You may walk away, Pirianka. You may curse my name. But you cannot unmake what was woven that night." Her chest tightened. The certainty in his voice frightened her more than anger would have. For a long moment they stood in silence, the cold pressing around them, the creek whispering beneath its ice. Finally, Pirianka turned and walked back toward camp, her steps quick, her shoulders stiff. She wanted to believe she had left him behind, but all the way back the name echoed in her mind, steady and strong, Ahive, that night as she lay awake. By the fire she pressed her hands against her chest as if to quiet the storm inside her. She hated the feeling that crept in alongside her anger, the flicker of something that felt dangerously close to belonging. The council fire burned high that night, its glow throwing long shadows across the circle of faces. Pirianka sat near the edge, her knees drawn close, wishing she could disappear into the dark, but every eye was upon her. She could feel their weight pressing down like the storm winds. Grandmother Sandy's voice carried first, deep and steady. "The spirits do not waste firewood on a storm unless it has purpose. He gave you the blanket, child. You were chosen to carry it. And you must accept." Murmurs of agreement rose from the crowd. Warriors nodded, older women clucked their tongues, and the children sat wide-eyed, drinking in every word. Pirianka's jaw tightened. She wanted to shout that she had not asked for this, that she wanted no husband chosen by custom. But to challenge the council openly was to invite shame. Still, silence weighed on her chest like stones. It was Naeli, loyal as ever, who spoke in her defense. Is a woman not allowed choice? Must she bow to tradition when her heart has not agreed? Some of the elders frowned, muttering among themselves. One old man spat into the fire. Her heart was saved by him. That is all the choice the spirits gave her. Pirianka's cheeks burned. She wanted to scream, to throw the blanket back into the flames and be done with it. Yet even as she thought of it, her eyes strayed to the figure standing across the fire. Ayv. He stood tall in the firelight, bare-chested as always, his skin bronzed and marked with faint scars that told of battles long past. The glow of the flames danced on the turquoise and bone jewelry across his shoulders. He was silent, watching, his expression carved of stone. He did not argue, did not defend himself, did not demand. And that infuriated her most of all. When the council fire ended, Pirianka stormed away from the circle, her breath ragged. Naeli hurried after her. "You cannot keep fighting them all, Pirianka. They will not listen. Then let them not listen." Pirianka snapped, whirling around. Her hair spilled loose across her shoulders, her eyes burning with tears. "I will not live a life that is not mine. Do you hear me?" "I will not," Naeli softened, taking her hand. "But what if it is not, James? What if it is a path meant for you?" Pirianka shook her off, her heart hammering. She wanted to hate him, to despise the tradition that bound her, to spit at the idea of fate. But when she looked back, she saw Ahive still standing near the fire, the light flickering in his dark eyes. And she could not deny the stir within her chest, the storm she could not tame. Later that night, Pirianka sat alone by the creek. The snow cracked beneath her as she shifted, her reflection trembling in the dark water. The blanket lay folded beside her, untouched. She thought of her 30 years of working, surviving, fighting off loneliness. Men had courted her before, but none had ever seen her, not truly. They had wanted a helper, a mother, a body to warm their beds. She had chosen solitude over slavery. So why did this man's silence feel different? Why did the way he had placed the blanket around her feel less like a claim and more like recognition? Her thoughts shattered when she heard the crunch of footsteps behind her. She spun, her pulse quickening. It was a Hive. He stopped a few paces away, the moonlight catching in his long hair. His breath steamed in the icy air, yet he looked untouched by the cold, as though the storm itself bent around him. "You should not sit alone in the dark," he said softly. "I am not afraid." Pirianka shot back. A Hive tilted his head, studying her. "Fear is not what I see in you." Her throat tightened. "Then what do you see?" He stepped closer, the faint crunch of snow beneath his feet the only sound between them. His voice was low, steady, carrying a weight that sent a shiver down her spine. "I see a woman who has fought storms all her life. I see a fire that refuses to die. I see the one the earth gave back to me when it could have taken you." Pirianka's breath caught. She wanted to look away, but his eyes held her. She felt her anger softening, her defenses bending. For the first time, she wondered if perhaps the bond spoken of by the elders was not about ownership at all, but about recognition. Before she could answer, a Hive bent and picked up the blanket from where it lay on the snow. He did not place it on her. Instead, he draped it over his own arm, his gaze steady. "When you're ready," he said quietly, "you will take it back. Not because they told you to, because you choose to." Then he turned and walked away, leaving her staring after him, her heart torn between defiance and something dangerously close to longing. The dawn broke sharp and merciless, cutting through the night like a blade of silver light. Smoke curled from the center fires of the camp, rising into the pale sky, carrying with it the scent of roasted venison and wood smoke. But beneath the ordinary hum of morning, an unease shivered through the air like the tremble before a storm. Word had spread. The council had been called. Pirianka woke with her heart already pounding. She sat up beneath the heavy blanket, its coarse fibers scratching against her arms. The lodge was empty. A Hive was gone. The fire had burned low, embers glowing faintly, and the silence felt louder than any war drum. She touched the blanket unconsciously, the one she had tried to throw back at him the day before, and it filled her chest with a tightness she couldn't explain. Outside, voices stirred the air, murmurs, curious eyes. The people of the tribe, who had seen her arrival like a storm tossed by fate, now gathered in whispers. Some looked with suspicion, others with pity, but many with the quiet certainty of tradition. When Hive finally stepped back into the lodge, he didn't speak at first. He stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the space, his long black hair unbound and loose down his chest. The morning light spilled over his frame, glinting off the bone and turquoise jewelry that adorned his neck and arms. His eyes were unreadable, steady as river stone. "They wait," he said simply. Pirianka swallowed. Her throat felt like it was packed with sand. "For what?" "For us." He didn't explain further. Instead, he gestured for her to follow. The walk through the camp felt like walking into the jaws of something vast and ancient. The air was cold, biting against her face, but the heat of 100 stairs burned hotter. Men, women, children, all lined the paths, their gazes drawn to the strange pair. Some muttered words she couldn't understand, though she knew they were about her. Others glanced at the blanket she still clutched around her shoulders, and their expressions grew heavier, almost reverent. At the center of the camp, the council fire blazed high. Around it sat the elders, men with lined faces, women with hawk-sharp eyes, each one radiating the weight of years. They sat in silence, waiting, their authority thicker than the smoke that curled above them. Ahiv stopped before the fire. Pirianka stood beside him, her heart battering her ribs. An elder woman, her hair braided with eagle feathers, spoke first. Her voice was low but carried, clear as a struck bell. "The warrior gave his blanket," she said. The woman accepted. "I did not." Pirianka burst out, the words torn from her before she could stop them. "I tried to give it back." Her voice cracked in the cold air, and a ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. The elder only raised a hand, silencing the whispers. Her gaze, sharp and unyielding, turned to Pirianka. "Once given, it cannot be undone. The blanket is more than cloth. It is warmth, protection, the vow of a man's spirit. You wear it, and you bear his promise." Pirianka's knees weakened, as if the ground itself had shifted beneath her. "You mean—" Another elder, this one a man with white paint streaked across his face, finished her thought. His voice was solemn, like thunder over mountains. "You are his wife now." The word struck harder than any bullet. Pirianka's breath caught, her vision tunneling as the world tilted. Wife? She had been taken in from the cold, offered kindness. And now they spoke as though her fate had been sealed in the fibers of this cursed blanket. She turned to Ahiv, desperate, furious. "You knew." Her voice was a whisper of betrayal. "You knew what it meant." His jaw tightened, but he did not look away. His dark eyes were heavy, almost sorrowful, but steady. "Yes." The crowd stirred, voices rising, some in approval, others in debate. Children's laughter mixed strangely with the tension, as though innocence itself refused to bow to the weight of tradition. Pirianka felt as though the air had been stolen from her lungs. She wanted to scream, to tear the blanket from her shoulders, and throw it into the fire. But when her hands gripped it, ready to cast it away, something stopped her. Not the tribe's stares, not fear of punishment. It was the memory of that night, the firelight flickering in Ahiv's calm eyes as he stoked the flames, the way he had kept his distance but never once left her alone. The blanket weighed more than wool and fabric. It was warmth she hadn't felt in years, and that terrified her most of all. The elder woman raised her voice again, cutting through the confusion. "It is done," she said firmly. "What the warrior gives, the Great Spirit witnesses. And what the woman accepts, the tribe honors. Their bond is sealed." The crowd erupted, cheers, protests, prayers rising into the morning sky. Pirianka stood in the eye of it all, her chest heaving, her mind spinning. She wasn't sure if she wanted to run, scream, or simply sink into the earth and vanish. Ahiv stepped closer, his voice low enough only she could hear. "You are not alone now," he said, but to Pirianka those words sounded less like comfort and more like chains. Pirianka had never heard silence so heavy. It stretched between her and Ahiv like a taut rope, ready to snap at any wrong word. Around them, the circle of elders and warriors did not move, their breath ghosting in the frosty dawn. The blanket, still clutched in her hands, felt heavier than iron chains. "They've bound us," she whispered, half to herself, half to him. Her voice cracked with disbelief. "Because of this? Because you gave me warmth for one night?" Ahiv's eyes stayed steady on hers. He stood tall, his bare chest rising and falling with deep, controlled breaths. The turquoise and bone jewelry across his neck glimmered faintly in the pale sun, but it was his eyes, dark, unblinking, that held her captive. "In our way," he said softly, his words careful as if they might wound, "a man gives his blanket. To a woman, he gives more than warmth. He gives protection. He gives himself." Pirianka's stomach knotted. She wanted to scream that she hadn't asked for this, hadn't asked for his protection or his life. And yet, She remembered the moment in the snow when she was shivering so hard her teeth ached, when she thought she might not see another dawn. She remembered his hands, steady and strong, tucking the blanket around her shoulders without asking for anything. In return, her heart hammered. Am I angry because I didn't choose, or because part of me wants this? The elder nearest them, his long braids streaked with silver, stepped forward. His voice rolled out like thunder. It is done. The woman lives because the warrior gave her his blanket. She walks beneath his shadow now. The tribe answered with a low hum of agreement, the sound chilling in its finality. Pirianka's throat burned. I'm not one of you. I don't belong here. I didn't agree to this. The elder's gaze softened, but his tone was immovable. The blanket chose for you. Ahive stepped closer then, so close that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin against the cold morning. He did not touch her. He simply stood within reach, like a mountain that refused to move. I did not mean to bind you, he said, voice low enough for only her to hear. But I will not take back what I gave. Your life is safe with me. That is all I can promise. His words pressed into her like the weight of the snow-laden sky. A promise of safety. And yet so much more. For a long moment, Pirianka stared at the blanket, the coarse weave beneath her fingers. The edges smelled of smoke and pine, carrying his scent. Something inside her shifted. A part of her long starved of tenderness whispered that maybe fate had not tricked her, but delivered her somewhere she was meant to be. Still, her pride bristled. If I walk beneath your shadow, she said firmly, lifting her chin, then I walk there by choice, not because your people say. So, do you understand? Ahiv's lips twitched into the faintest smile, almost hidden by the dawn's haze. Then let your choice be seen. He reached out, slow as the sunrise, and tugged the blanket so that half draped over his shoulder, the other half around hers. The gesture was simple, but it sent a gasp through the gathered tribe. Now they stood beneath one covering, one shelter. As if the earth itself acknowledged their bond, the elder raised his hands once more. So be it. Together, they stand. The circle broke into voices, drums beat, women sang, children cheered. The tribe celebrated, but for Pirianka, the world narrowed to the steady warmth of the man at her side. She looked up at him, at the warrior who had changed everything with one act of kindness. Ahive, she said quietly. I don't know what comes next. His eyes softened then, their storm-dark edges gentling into something like peace. Then we will walk into it together. The fire of defiance in her chest dimmed, replaced with something steadier like embers refusing to die. She didn't know if this was destiny or chance, love or duty. But she knew one thing with certainty. The blanket was no longer a burden, it was a beginning.